Welcome back. This is Kotao, and this video will be the second iteration for my analysis on the health of the War of Rights player base. My previous video left off in November of 2024, and this analysis will cover the trends in the War of Rights player base since then up to the time of writing, which is July 23rd. A link will be left in the description to that video for any who may be curious. With that admin stuff out of the way, let's get into it. Now, the intent for this video is to measure and analyze the overall health of the player base for War of Rights, at least the best as I can do with the publicly available data, identify any existing trends, and potentially offer some context for the players, and possibly even insights for the development team to help guide their future decisions in some small way, and at least let the players know, okay, this is where the game is at right now as far as the player base goes. As a general note, this is not an analysis of the business model for Campfire Games. I don't have the data for that. And frankly, their revenues, at least to my knowledge, are driven by new player sales. That's where new person buys a game, that's how they make money. While player base can offer an indication on the overall health of the community, it only indirectly and incompletely addresses the commercial dynamics which likely and reasonably drive the game developers' decision-making processes. They are a business, after all. With all that said, let's continue. Based on my analysis, I believe that the player base for War Rights is in fact healthy and appears to have significant potential for further growth. Although I have to add a word of caution that based on previous cycles, the gains that we've seen in growing the player base are vulnerable to being easily eroded, as they have been in the past. Now, I base my conclusions on utilizing data I've taken from the Steam charts, link in the description to where I grabbed the numbers from, which measure the average player base per month. I'm aware that there are other websites that similarly track the data and may offer slightly different figures, but I'm working off the assumption, reasonable in my mind at least, that such numbers will not reflect significantly altered trends. The exact numbers might be different, but the trend should be similar. But if anyone wants to use those numbers and do their own analysis, and please do so. I'd be very interested in seeing that to test that assumption. And if it's the case, I might have to change my methodology. But for now, I think we're good. Just in case anybody asks, I do not use the peak player numbers, as these tend to weigh the peak times for the game, namely the NA weekend period specifically, in their data sets, while failing to more accurately capture, in my view, the significant trends in the European and East Asian time zone communities, which get captured in the monthly average roll-ups. And those communities make up a substantial portion of the player base, so I think it's important we have them represented. Finally, the data for the final month of July is incomplete at this point, because I'm doing this on the 23rd, and in fact includes some data from the previous month. The way the Steam charts works is it's every month until the current 30 days, so I get really, the last month is June 23rd or 24th, whatever it is, to July 23rd. But given the time period, I don't believe this will substantially impact the final numbers, but I'll revisit the July 25 numbers again the next time I do this video, probably sometime in the winter. Alright, so let's get into the numbers themselves. So starting where I left off, November 2024 saw the release of the new iteration of the zombie mode event, which I actually really enjoyed, which saw a substantial increase in the player base from a level of 216 to 252, an increase of 36 or 14% over the previous month. This placed the game in a very strong position as far as player base goes moving into the winter months, and in fact was the best October since release on Steam in 2019. Furthermore, it continued a new trend starting with the previous zombie mode in 2023 of seeing a strong increase in November compared to previous years, which either saw a stagnation or a slight decline for that period. In my view, this represents that the time zombie events, and I think other timed events, not only likely drives new players, but renews interest in the game generally for old players. So I think they are a well-trodden method at this point. Unfortunately, the next month and subsequent Christmas event, or winter event I should say, did not drive a player base increase, and in fact saw a substantial decline to 214, erasing all the gains from the previous month. On the positive side, it was the highest December on record. This was disappointing to me personally, as I not only enjoy the annual winter event, but this month also included, in my view, a great update, which also gave us 13 additional skirmish maps as well as some other changes I had been looking forward to, including destructible snake rail fences. As much as I appreciated these updates and hope to see continued development along these lines, they failed to improve or even really sustain the player base levels. But we in fact see a decrease, which is not even a common occurrence in the yearly trends, which are usually a mixed result, so that makes it even more worrying. But hopefully this was just a one-off and weird thing where everybody was coming off of the zombie high. Moving into January, we see that it remained relatively stable, in fact growing slightly to 222 from 214. It did come in slightly lower from the highs in 2024 and even 2022, but still, it's pretty high based on the previous levels during other years. You can see it on the chart. It's not looking too bad. Overall, there isn't much to report for this period, but may indicate, if this kind of trend continues, that the player base can sustain itself for a time without updates, but on its own, there's not really a capacity to grow absent those updates and sales and new game modes and such from the development team. It's very similar for February, as we see a slight decline to 208, basically stable, and generally matching the trends of a slight decline in this month anyway. But still relatively strong compared to other Februaries in previous years. Nothing significant here, but adding additional reference points which may reinforce the observation of inability to grow the community outside of updates. Now, March displays this potential growth with the Ballistics update, accompanied with a Steam sale, which witnessed an increase to 257, the highest level for the player base since August of 2024, and just 13 shy of the high for this month in 2024. Now, this update did see significant renewed interest in the game, with the gunplay dynamics being changed, along with other changes and updates they made along the way. The novelty of the 500-player server, which also occurred during this month, also may have improved, and likely did improve the numbers. However, spikes from gameplay alterations like this can also have the potential for declines in the following months. This could come from certain reasons, maybe not even related, but some explanations may include new players quickly losing interest, and or veterans abandoning the game due to dissatisfaction either with the changes themselves or because they're upset because their desired update was not delivered yet. And unfortunately, we see such a rapid decline in April, which tends to have a mixed record historically that month, but past sales and updates impact the month-to-month data, so always cautious about looking too deeply into the trends there. Regardless, though, we see a substantial decrease all the way down to 201, a loss of 56 average players, or nearly a 22% decline in the player base. This is a poor performance, and representing the worst April since 2021, which itself was only 200, so it's just a one-player difference. Now, this may indicate that while the Ballistics update did drive a player-based spike, those gains were brittle and quickly dissipated. However, this trend was certainly not terminal and may saw a healthy recovery, moving back up to 220, only slightly behind the highs of 2024. This may have been buttressed by the release of further updates in late May, including an increase in the server size to 400 for all the servers, as well as adjustments to map boundaries and ticket balances and other such things. May is not necessarily a banner month, so the improvement during this period showed some healthy prospects for a potential upcoming summer surge. Now, June saw the announcements, although it wouldn't hit until July 4th, for the very anticipated 1776 event. However, even absent a major update itself, this month continued the trend from the previous one for steady and healthy increases, moving up to 238, and once more only slightly behind the highs achieved in 2024. Although the previous year also saw gains, this is not necessarily mirroring the result of the summer season, opening up for additional gaming, as previous cycles were mixed somewhat, so this shows some good health for the game for these past 2 years, increasing during this period. Now, in my view, this indicates a generally healthy time for the game and giving strong momentum that might help the event, so I think this was a very smart move to anchor an event on this period, and I'm hoping the 250th anniversary further helps it next year. And indeed, the 1776 event appears to have been a smashing success, driving up the player base. Although the final days may slightly adjust the month of July and its ultimate landing spot, as of the time of writing, we see that the game's player base has massively spiked all the way up to 348, reaching levels that surpass not only the numbers for 2024, but nearly matching the all-time record, not only for July, but for the entire game, achieved in 350 for July in 2020. Now, that period spike resulted from a mixture of the COVID-19 lockdowns, the release of artillery, and the game being featured on Steam's main page. So it had a lot going for it in 350 in the 2020, and we're nearly there, or possibly even over it when all's said and done with the 1776 update. So it's very good news, and the event has driven a substantial increase in the player base. What remains to be seen, though, is whether this level can be sustained, or at least the damage mitigated as much as possible. The months of August and September are likely to see a decline, as we have seen historically, so if it goes down, that's not really an issue. But it remains to be seen if the spike and the collapse of 2020 can be avoided this time around, so we don't see a complete or almost near total collapse like we did from those gains we gained back in 2020. And more players can be maintained with the community to drive growth in the player base coming into September, October, and especially November, and those periods for the game. So how healthy is the game's player base? Well, first off, I'd say it certainly isn't dead. Now, I would define that as figures below the initial launch in 2019, which it's nowhere near that. The next question is the player base, quote-unquote, dying? The answer once more appears to be an emphatic no, as the game is still showing not only stability, but capacity for growth. So how about is the game's player base stagnant? Now, if you'd asked me back in April, I may have answered that it appears to be, as the game maintained its base. It could even see spikes at times, but remained overall stable and unable to surpass the highs of the previous year, and if that trend continued, it might be in some trouble. However, the explosion in July has, at least for now, removed that conclusion from my consideration, at least for the time being. So is the game's player base healthy? Well, we'll see long term. It really depends on how much we dip coming out of this event and whether momentum can be sustained, or at least mitigate the losses as much as possible, while seasonal events, sales, updates drive future gains. Of course, time will indicate this, but there are some things to be hopeful for as general development continues, and I think seasonal events will be expanded on and added to in the future. Now, I recommended that seasonal events be expanded as major growth drivers in the previous video, and the 1776 event has only solidified further, in my view, the viability of that strategy. On the other hand, more options for player-driven content, including the proposed server token system, the announced new clan unit recruitment system, as well as the map editor, I think would help further drive sustainment of the existing player base and keep players interested longer. However, the biggest issue, in my view, remains the failure to implement the announced moderation tools to deal with racism and other toxicity in the game. And moderation, I'm talking about the admin game developer moderation, not the tools that exist already, which are a welcome change that has been added over time. Now, the development team announced plans last year to implement this system to deal with the issue, but it has been more than 12 months since the announcement, and so far you don't really see any signs of a timeline for implementation, at least that I've seen. If I missed it, please let me know in the comments. I don't always catch everything. But regardless, until steps are taken to address the game's player base's negative reputation through control systems, as the devs announced plans to do, in my view, any gains will be ephemeral, and the game will continue to have limited growth potential. It'll continue to be viewed as that game with that toxic player base. And no matter how great the game becomes, it'll not shake that moniker. But what do you think? How healthy is the player base for War of Rights? What would you like to see in future development for the game to help not only sustain itself, but to grow? Let me know in the comments below. This has been Kotel, and thanks for watching.